I'm Ann Simmons in the newsroom of the Los Angeles Times. Less than 3 years after the withdrawal of American troops from Iraq, that country faces a challenge that threatens to push it to the brink of catastrophe. Radical militants have seized control of Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, and are pushing their way to the capital of Baghdad. The United States spent billions of dollars fighting the war in Iraq, and more than 4,000 American soldiers lost their lives. Now the White House is weighing its options for a possible renewed engagement in Iraq. Joining me to discuss the crisis and potential US involvement are Los Angeles Times columnist Doyle McManus and global affairs writer Carol J. Williams. Hello, Carol.
Hi, Ann.
And welcome, Doyle.
Hello, Ann.
Doyle, first of all, tell us, who are these militants exactly, and how did we get to this particular juncture in Iraq?
Well, the jihadists who are calling themselves the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and who have swept through much of northern and northwestern Iraq, are actually the successors to a group that you may recall from the days of the American occupation of Iraq. At the time, it was called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It was a set of jihadist groups that allied themselves with Al-Qaeda. They were pretty well suppressed by around 2006 and 2010, in that period, by the American and Iraqi military. But two things happened since then. First, a big security vacuum opened up in the desert lands between Iraq and Syria, in large part because of the uprising in Syria in 2011 that loosened Syrian government control at the time. And that's why this group is now the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. They are fighting in both countries. And the second thing that happened was that the fragile accommodation, if you like, among Iraq's three big ethnic groups, the Sunni Muslims, the Shia Muslims, and the Kurds in the north, broke down. The government of Nouri Maliki in Baghdad has done a spectacularly poor job of keeping everybody on board. Right. And so ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, saw an opportunity to move back into Iraq.
Very interesting. Now, Carol, the US has spent billions of dollars in investing in training the Iraqi army, equipment, and it appears that the Iraqi army was just rolled over. There have been reports of mass desertions, and what accounts for this exactly?
Well, the army, like most institutions in Iraq, has been, rife with corruption and sectarian, sentiments. The Maliki government has not made any effort to unite these three populations within Iraq, and there's a lot of resentment in the army because they're being expected to fight the sectarian battles for the Shiite government, and this has led to disintegration and a lot of problems in the command and coordination of the troops.
Right. And Doyle, President Obama has stated that absolutely no boots on the ground, no American boots on the ground. What realistically are the options for the US in terms of possibly getting involved again in Iraq?
Well, in terms of military options, actually there are quite a few that are short of boots on the ground. The United States could use airstrikes against ISIS, either drone strikes on a local level or even carrier-borne aircraft. There is the George H.W. Bush, one of the Navy's newest carriers, has steamed into the Gulf to make those planes available. It's also possible that the United States could send back a military advisor mission to try and help the Iraqis coordinate what they're doing a little better. The Iraqi army, even the Shiite part of the Iraqi army, is still quite large and well equipped, and in fact, so far has acquitted itself reasonably well, according to recent reports, at least in the defense of Baghdad after all those initial reversals in the north. So there is still something to work with there.
Now, what needs to happen, though? What needs to happen in order for the US to intervene in some way, or whether or not it's airstrikes or otherwise?
Well, Obama has made it clear that exactly he has no he has no appetite for military intervention merely to prop up the Maliki government that, as Carol said, has botched the job of keeping Iraq's different groups together, has lost the allegiance and the respect of both the Sunnis and most of the Kurds. And you know, the United States government, the Obama administration, has been quite critical of Maliki all along for those policies. So Obama has said, we are willing to help this government, but this government is going to have to do a better job of its basic task of responding to all the different groups in the country. Now, here's the puzzle to me, the practical puzzle. Right. We're talking about a military crisis that's underway right now. I suppose you could ask Prime Minister Maliki for a promise and maybe a program on paper to do better. It's very difficult to see how you could really get a full-scale political accommodation in a matter of a few weeks after so many years of deterioration.
Right. Well, just to wrap up, Carol, if we move to Iran or Iran's involvement, there are reports that Iran has been sending troops to fight alongside the Iraqi army. Is there a scenario now then where the US and Iran essentially become allies in terms of trying to resolve this crisis?
Well, they have common objectives in not wanting to let this very brutal fundamentalist Sunni militia gain ground in both Syria and Iraq and merge their forces to create a sort of proto-state in the middle of the Middle East, which would be a threat to Iran as much as other countries in the region and to the United States and Europe eventually. So there has to be some, at least, coordination between Iran and the United States in how to turn back these Sunni militants who are gaining ground so quickly.
Right. What's your prognosis, Doyle?
You know, this is moving much too fast and much too chaotically for any prognosis to hold. But okay, here's what I think is the most likely outcome at this point. ISIS has moved very fast in northern Iraq, but it has met with serious resistance from both the Iraqi army and from Shia militias when it hit the suburbs, the northern suburbs of Baghdad. It is quite plausible to say that, to look at this and say, over the next weeks and months, we appear to have a de facto partition. We certainly have a de facto partition of Iraq. And the question is, can the Iraqi government, maybe with some additional Iranian and American help, solidify its control of its area? What happens, as I think Carol pointed out, in western Iraq, in Anbar province, which is partly controlled by ISIS and partly not? And then does this turn into a war between Iraq, Iran, and the United States on one side, a very strange alliance, and that jihadist-ruled group in northwestern Iraq?
Well, we'll certainly be watching very closely. Thank you so much, Doyle. Thank you, Carol. For more on this story and others, please visit latimes.com and follow us on Twitter @LATimes.